Hey y'all, welcome to the Team LocoFit Roundtable, hosted by me, Lauren Conlon, owner of Team LocoFit. Each week, I am joined by one of our coaches to dive headfirst into the nutrition, training, mindset, and coaching strategies we use with our clients. If you loved the show, please subscribe, leave us a review, tell a friend, you know the drill. And for more information about coaching, the programs we offer, and additional content, visit teamlocofit.com. All right, and we are back, and this week I'm joined with Rick.
Hello.
And I'm really excited for this topic because it's something that we talk about a lot and it's just so pervasive just in society right now. And it's social media and I would say just screen time in general, not just social media apps. Obviously that's where most people spend their time. But the pervasiveness of screen time and social media and how it really is affecting people, in particular children, are obviously really, really affected by this. And I became super obsessed with all this stuff when I started really realizing that I was having problems with, delegating time, like social media, and then like not being on it, and just like screens in general. And like even somebody like me who knows a lot about it and doesn't really want to be addicted to it. And we did a podcast focusing on this before, and like you don't really choose that you like want to be addicted to something, right? Obviously, especially like this, but these things are literally designed in a very specific way, and they're completely unregulated. So I've been diving really deep into this. I love Jonathan Haidt stuff. If you guys have not read his if you've not read his books or listened to him speak, he's amazing. He's a moral psychologist, but he presents things in a really, really interesting way that I don't think is common. There was that movie that came out, The Social Dilemma, which I finally saw, which again, like I've been like reading about this stuff, but I had never seen the movie. So anyways, we're going to start talking about that today. And I think it's really important discussion, not only for listeners, but obviously if listeners do have children too, because this is only getting worse, and I don't really foresee any regulations for some time, which hopefully there will be at some point. Not like I'm big on regulations, but I think that there should be regulations on these businesses. Like, it's just insane, so.
Yeah, just a couple of things to kind of piggyback off of that. Number one, addiction happens whether you're young or old. So if you're an adult listening to this podcast, don't think that you are outside of the realm of the people who apply to this. It literally applies to everyone. Anyone who has access to a phone or has access to social media accounts, you're susceptible to every bait and switch kind of thing that they do. I guess one of the things that I like to start with when we're talking about this is go right to the top. Steve Jobs, the creator of iPads, doesn't and didn't allow his own children to have his product. He created the product, he knows exactly what it is, and he didn't want that product in the hands of his children. That should say something to everybody who has an iPad. Bill Gates and his wife Melania, when their children were old enough, and by old enough they determined that it was 14. That's out of the preteen or very edge of preteen, before they actually had their first cell phone. And so you want to look at these people, and if you think you know more about technology and understanding of it than Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, call me, we need to talk. Because I want to know what you're doing, because you don't. No one does. They understand these things on a deeper level, and if they're restricting their own children, that should send a message to everyone who's using this. It is dangerous, and it is an addiction. And I think it's so easy because it's so convenient, and there's so many other bells and whistles, and it slides into our life for very different reasons than what we think. Like when you go out and get a drink, you know exactly what you're doing. When you snort a line of cocaine, you know exactly what you're doing. It has a very specific purpose. Picking up your phone seems so inconsequential. It seems so unimportant, but it's not. And it has the same effect in you that those other drugs do. And people don't pay attention to that when they're looking at their phones or their screen time or social media apps.
It's really crazy. And like, thankfully, there's a lot of people who do have these kind of, like stopping mechanisms, right? Or they at least become aware of it. Like I became aware of it, you're aware of it. Like a lot of people are aware of it. But even then, even when you are aware of it, how many times do you just find yourself scrolling on something? Like
sure. It's
so easy. Or like you actually go to pick up your phone for something productive. And you go to search something, and then you like look up and you're like, fuck, what was I doing?
Right.
Right? And I'm an adult with a fully functional brain, debatable at times, but it's fully developed. And I can make these decisions to like, do these things and regulate them. But kids don't.
Right.
And that is the difference between like kids and adults. Like, I mean, there's a lot of differences, but the thing with all these things have really good intentions, right? And you can even like package up, like you said, like there's like these great things like, oh, the iPad has an educational game. It's like, listen, your kid's not gonna be Baby Einstein because it played on the iPad, okay? I get how it's being sold to you like this. Like there's these educational great things that they can do, but it's like kids were really, really smart and before all of this happened, and there's plenty of ways to teach them outside of an iPad. And you know, you have to really be honest with yourself. Okay, if like, is the child only using it for that exact reason, or are they using it for all these other things, right? And like you just trying to tell yourself that they're using it for that. And I'll be the first to say, as everybody knows, I do not have children, so I understand that it can sound very judgmental when I'm saying something like this, right? Because I don't, oh, you don't understand what it's like to have kids. And I don't, because I don't have any. But I can, because I'm on the outside of it, I try and like see and observe people, you know, and like I can see the changes. And I've talked to people who have kids and they know the difference. Like I have so many friends who have kids who are like, I took this away and like they are so much better in like almost every area of their life. And at first it's hard because they're like, the iPad, like I want your phone, they're like screaming about it. But like once they start to do things without it, then they kind of just forget. You know, and it's just really sad. Like I went the other night to go to Ulta, and it closed at like 7 o'clock. Why is it close early? Anyway, COVID. Yeah, I know. COVID knows it's 8 o'clock. Anyways, maybe it always closes at 7. I just didn't recognize.
COVID knows it's 8 o'clock.
I don't know why it closed, but anyways, there's an ice cream store next door, so I took the liberty.
Now we know why you went to Ulta.
No, I really had to go. Anyways. So I was like, well, I'm already here. This sounds really great. I'll support a small business, right? All about it. And as I'm in line, like most of the people in front of me, like when they have their kids, were either on their phones or an iPad. And they're literally holding it, like we're waiting in line to get ice cream. They are half looking at it, half playing with it, half like throwing it away, like half doing all this stuff. And I'm just like, why does your kid have an iPad right now while they're walking down, because this is like on like a strip mall, you know what I mean? Like why are you looking at this while you're walking down like this, like the sidewalk? Like, you know, like why is this even out? This is not a thing where it's like, you know, mom really needs to like focus right now for the next hour, and like I'm really busy doing this, like, you know, you're 2 hours a day, like we're gonna do this now. Like no, this is just like free, like all the time. What is the point of this? What is this teaching this child? Like it's teaching them to have no focus.
And I think that's symptomatic of what the bigger problem is people aren't putting it in those terms. They're not looking at this the same way they would if the kid was doing something else that's potentially dangerous. And so it's a part of our daily life. We don't think twice about it even as adults to pick up our phones or go to our laptops and check things. So it doesn't necessarily translate from this is something dangerous and potentially harmful. So when you're letting your kids do it, and we're letting our kids do it at much younger ages, 3, 4, 5, you're talking about kids who are like going on walks in the neighborhood. They're probably 8 or 9 years old. That's still not there. I mean, we're seeing kids in much younger generations having access to these things, and it's not really being regulated because people don't look at it as a dangerous thing or a threat to their child. But you see increases in attention deficit disorder, we see increases in depression, we see increases in anxiety, we see increases in identity crises that people really struggle with knowing who they are and what their values are and what their beliefs are. There's a lot of different areas that this stuff filters into that people just don't pay attention to. So to them, when you're checking your phone as a parent, it's not an issue. And you're right. You go look up a menu because you want to go order some food from somewhere. You check the menu and then you scroll through emails. You check Reddit. You check CNN. You look at Facebook. You look at Instagram. You see your likes and dislikes and all that kind of stuff. And before you know it, it's 20, 30 minutes later. You've been ignoring everybody in your house. And now you're like, oh my God, I got to go. And so you put your phone down. That's life. That happens 3, 4, 5, 6 times a day for most people. And so I think one of the things that I want people to understand about it is this. Number one, social media accounts in particular, they have a tendency to take over your sense of identity and who you are and what you seek out and what you seek inside yourself. And it absolutely is an addiction. So let me put it to you this way. Let's look at it from using cocaine. Let's look at it from using drugs and alcohol, and let's look at using social media accounts. And I'm going to give the basic criteria for what we would consider to be addiction. And you tell me if it doesn't fit within all three, okay? So if we say loss of control over the activity, meaning You keep using the activity and you don't really have control over what you're doing. You just keep using it. Which one are we talking about? Are we talking about all three? If I were to say compulsively seeking out despite negative consequences in your life, so poor school performance, social anxiety, isolation, are we talking about drugs and alcohol, or are we talking about social media? Because people still seek it out despite whatever negative things are happening to them as a result of it. Develop a tolerance in which you need higher and higher amounts, stimulation, right? Tolerance is consistent with drugs and alcohol. You start with an app, you look at it for a few minutes, the longer it stays on your phone, the more you engage in it. The first time you downloaded Instagram, how long were you on it? Probably like 10, 15 minutes maybe. How long are you on it today? For hours. Experience withdrawal if you can't consume the addiction. Are we talking about cocaine and drugs and alcohol, or are we talking about social media? You want to do it? Do a social experiment. Take your phone away from your kids for like an hour. They won't know what to do. You'll see them twitching. You'll see this a lot. You'll see them reach into their pockets, or they won't know what to do. And it's like the stimulation has been taken away from them. The addiction has been taken away. The drug has been removed. And so they struggle with what to do without it. And so when you look at it from those categories, you don't know whether if I just look at it and say loss of control, seek it out despite negative consequences, developing a tolerance for it, and experiencing withdrawal when it's not there. I could be talking about cocaine, or I could be talking about Facebook. It's the same thing. And that's the point, is I want people to start framing this through the eyes and the lens of an addiction. Now, is alcohol always a bad thing? No, if it's done within moderation. But there are some people who can't have alcohol, and they have to learn to live their life without it. And guess what? You'll be fine without social media. You really will. But no one wants to live that. And everybody's in this like pre-contemplation stage where they're like, I'm not the one that has the problem. Everybody else has the problem. Yeah. Right? So there's the level of denial that starts to set in.
And I think something too, just in general, like habits, like one thing about habit formation is that, how you said, like, even if you know there's a negative consequence, you will still often engage in that behavior if it's become habitual. So it's really habitual to, when I wake up, I grab my phone, because a lot of people have their alarm on their phone.
Yep.
And just, now I woke up and I'm scrolling, and they're like, oh fuck, I was supposed to get out of bed and like be productive and like take a cold shower and like go, walk around. No, I was just scrolling for 20 minutes and now I have to like rush and get to work. And it's really habitual. Like, and the one thing that I can't remember where I was listening to this or heard about it, but the idea of like, people now won't just like go, like for example, at getting ice cream. People can't just sit there without checking something. They're waiting for 3 minutes and they're like, I gotta do something, right? And sometimes, obviously I'll do that too. Sometimes it's like, I'm in the middle of like posting something or sharing something or doing something because I have to do this for social media, for like work. But there's plenty of times that is not the case, and I'm not doing it for that reason. I'm doing it because it's just, I'm sitting here and I'll just whatever. I have to actively go, no, I need to put this away, and I need to just be, aware of my surroundings, which is probably a good thing for most people anyway, like, let's be honest. But also just in general, like, you start to see different interesting things when you're not just like have your face like in the screen. And the thing that is, if you guys did watch The Social Dilemma, I thought that they did a really, really good job with it. I'm somebody who's generally very negative or pessimistic or what's the word I'm looking for? Questioning, especially when it comes to a documentary, right? Like I don't look at documentaries and go, oh, this is totally unbiased. Because a lot of documentaries aren't, because documentaries are meant to entertain, they're not meant to just share educational information. So every documentary is going to have some kind of bias or some kind of direction. So I always go into it going like, it was probably some bullshit about social media, But I do think that they did a pretty good job at laying out kind of all of the things. And it wasn't just doom and gloom, like they were trying to give examples of what to do, because these are all the people in the movie, the documentary, were people who had been in these companies. They were on Pinterest and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and they worked in these companies to help build them, and they built them to be the way that they were. And the probably the scariest thing now is that the ways that they've built the algorithms, like they don't even really have full control over it.
They don't have control over it.
Which is super, super scary. And the fact now that they're taking all of the data, because that's what people don't get. They're like, oh, it's just free. It's like, it's not free. Like your information, like you are the, like what they're
You're the product.
Yeah, you are literally the product. So like, don't think this is free. They're taking all this information, and between like not just like the ads, that's one thing, but the way that they're showing you certain information and like what they're recommending, like that is super, super terrifying. Like they can direct whatever they want. And sometimes, again, they don't even really have like this full control over it. And it's like, oh my God, like this is really bad, particularly for misinformation that could be like harming people. But it's also just really bad, again, for these like developing brains, even us, like we are all susceptible to it. Like it's not like we are immune to these things. Like plenty of adults have these exact same problems. But the issue with the kids is that this is how they're like literally growing up, and like they're living vicariously through looking at a picture. You know, when, you know, as a girl growing up, like, you know, you could look at a magazine, or you could look at like a TV show, or you could look at whatever and be like, oh my gosh, that person is like so pretty, or like so popular, or they have great hair, or like I love this, or whatever it was. But then you kind of turned off the show, or like you put the magazine down, and it kind of just was over. It wasn't with like your other peer groups, like, oh, this girl had better lighting and a better phone and a better filter and a better outfit, and now she has more likes, and now she has more this. And mind you, these people now can't communicate. Like, oh my God, there's just so many things that like I just like spiral and like think about, and I'm like, oh my God, I want to rip every phone and every iPad out of every fucking kid's hand, like until they get to like high school. Even then, I mean, but like, oh my God,
yeah,
it's just crazy.
I think the part to me that's scary when it comes to kids versus adults is children are still developing. And so as an adult, you're like a solid object. You've been created, you've been molded and shaped, and you are who you are. There are still life experiences and things that are going to happen to you. They're going to change you. So I'm not saying you're done growing or you're done evolving, you know, but when you're in your 30s, like, you're pretty solid with who you are. By the time you get into your 40s, like that's it. But you're not developing. You're not learning right from wrong. You're not learning about how the world actually works. And so I kind of think of it like, I try and get parents to understand, if you've ever colored like Easter eggs, right? You have a bowl of clear water, and that's your child when they're born. There's no pollutants in it. It's just natural. It has no opinions or thoughts about the world. And so every little piece of dye that you add into that bowl and you start to swirl around, you can no longer separate those colors. Like they are what they are. So as that bowl is spinning and you keep adding different colors into it, the child is shaping and developing. Well, when you start to add social media and you start to add cell phones and screen time into that mix, they're still developing. They aren't the final product the way we are. If I want to change as an individual, I research something, I find it, I weigh the pros and the cons, and I go and do it. Children don't think in those ways. Whatever is in front of them becomes a part of who they are. And so if they're allowed to just keep dropping that in, it's mixed into part of their DNA. It's a part of who they are. They're developing with it. So in the past, we used to look for government agencies to regulate things, to keep things safe. There is no regulation when it comes to social media. The only regulation that a child will get comes through their parents. And if you are not paying attention, you're complicit in this act, you are part of the problem. It is your responsibility 100% to monitor and to check what is happening in your child's life and to make sure whatever they're doing on their devices, how soon they get it, deal with it. Your kid doesn't like you because you took the phone away, or they don't get one because they're the only 10-year-old in school who doesn't have it. Too bad. So what? Your kid hates you for like a few minutes. They'll love you when they're 25 and don't have the same problems that everybody else does. They can separate these things. You can't separate it when you're developing. If you grow with it, it's a part of who you are, and the separation will become exponentially more difficult when they get into their 20s or their 30s, if at all. You know, take an addict who's been struggling with heroin addiction for 20 years. See how easy it is for them to kick the habit, as opposed to somebody who used it for like 4 or 5 months. Like, still not going to be easy for 4 or 5 months, but 20 years of doing something, and it's a part of who you were since you were 8, 9, 4, you know, you're setting them back to a large degree.
So much. And I think that the thing that is scary is that as a parent, there's a lot of pushback because, right, like your kid, a few things. One, your kid's going to be mad at you. Your kid's going to, oh, I hate you. I want this. Everybody else has one. All this stuff, right? And then, so there's that part. And then there's also the other part that you're like, oh, well, am I the only parent who's not doing this? Like,
sure.
You know, you kind of feel bad, right? But honestly, I feel like when I have these conversations, or again, these people who have been doing, like, this is what they research, this is what they do, they're talking to other parents all the time. And a lot of people are saying the same thing. So instead of, what most people do is they just think that they're the only person on this like island who's thinking like this. Why don't you talk to the other parents in your school? And then you wouldn't be the only parent who's taking this away. It's like, wow, what a fucking concept. We actually all discuss things like adults and have communication skills. But once again, that's gone out the window for adults. So in any case, I just think that people, if they actually talk to everybody else at the school, they would be getting a sense. Now, not everybody, it's not going to be a unanimous thing that they're going to ban phones from everybody or iPads. But I think that there would be a lot more people than maybe some parents imagine who would be feeling the same way. And then they could be doing these things like together and navigating those challenges, you know, together and like setting up, okay, hey, yeah, our kids are going to get together and they're going to play. And, you know, obviously as kids age, like that's very different, but like for younger kids, you know what I mean? It's like, hey, instead of them being on their like iPad and swiping, like, why don't we actually like all get together? Like, oh my God, no way. That's insane to think about. And like, you know, there's other things too, you know, I know a lot of people talk about like safety, right? Like, oh, well, my kid has a phone because it's safer and I can call them and whatever. And there are other ways you can do that, and Jonathan Haidt is one of these people who discusses things like this because he's obviously very against giving his kids these types of devices. And, you know, so there are things, like there are ways, like I think his daughter wears like it's like a watch or something that has several phone numbers programmed in there, you know what I mean? And it can call. So, but it doesn't have all the other capabilities an iPhone has, or an iPad has. And I think it's really important to, maybe that's a little bit less convenient, but it's not that inconvenient. You know what I mean? It's not so hard, and it's not like you're just letting your kids go off and never having any communication with them. Because also, let's be honest, like how much of the time is that what they're using it for versus everything else? And then, you know, of course, you know, if like, let's say you do give your kids their phone or their iPad, like in their room at night, right? Like, and what if they wake up? And what's the first thing they do? They go and they pick that up because that's what adults do. So kids are certainly going to do that.
And so why are we so inclined to keep picking it up, right? There's plenty of things in our room that we don't pick up every single day. But why is it, what is it with this particular device? What is it with phones and apps that attract it to us? Part of that is, this is what makes it an addiction. Okay, and not all addictions are drugs and alcohol, right? We did a whole podcast on compulsive behaviors. It can be gambling, it can be exercise, right? A lot of our listeners are listening to this because they're interested in health and fitness. Anything can be taken to an extreme that can become an addiction. Well, your phone is no different. So the specific companies that were hired to develop these things, one of them, the company's name is actually called the Dopamine Lab. That's the name of the company. And Dopamine Lab was created with the sole purpose of creating and developing apps to increase user base, retention, and duration, length and time, and engagement that people want on the phone. And they specifically engineer apps to produce dopamine responses in the brain. For those of us, most people understand what dopamine is. It actually has several purposes in the body, but the main purpose for this stuff is the reward center. And so what ends up happening is, this is actually what's called, they call it brain hacking. And what you do is you deliberately manipulate the dopamine response. Okay, so this is the path that it begins to take, and this is why it gets really scary. So we think, when does dopamine come into our brain? Well, anytime you enjoy doing something, your brain is usually flooded, or dopamine receptors are active, and it's rewarding you with this activity. So if you like cheeseburgers, every time you eat a cheeseburger versus celery, your brain is producing more dopamine, right?
I like celery much more.
Okay. Some people do.
Totally kidding.
You get the point. So it's flooded. It does it when you're doing an activity that you like, whether that's art or bike riding or working out. Your brain is producing dopamine. So what ends up happening is this: your brain associates various activities with dopamine responses. So if I perform an activity or I do something and it produces a dopamine response, I now know that I like it. I've been rewarded by doing it. My brain rewarded me through it. So any experience that triggers a release of dopamine is therefore something we want to experience again. Think about all the things that you enjoy. You didn't just do them once, you keep doing them, whatever it is. So once you know that it's something you enjoy, you want to do it again, it takes it a step further, it goes a step down. If an experience triggers a dopamine release, our brains remember the cause and effect, which basically means this. Your brain will eventually release dopamine anytime we're reminded of that experience. So when you're daydreaming or you're thinking about something or you hear a song or fantasies of previous use, your brain responds by producing dopamine. Just by thinking about the activity now. So now you're not just using it, now you've taken it a step further and you're actually thinking about it. Here's where it gets even scarier. Take it a step below that. If your brain learns that by checking your phone, it results in some type of reward, it won't take long before your brain actually starts to produce dopamine anytime it's reminded of your phone. So what does that mean? That means if I'm not even doing anything right now, and I'm sitting here and we're talking or we're in our office or we're walking by and I see you check your phone, it makes me want to check my phone. I can start to produce, and everybody can start to produce a dopamine response in the brain just by anticipating its use. Not even by using it anymore. Before you had to use cocaine, like to get the high. And that's part of the psychological and the compulsive behaviors that come with it and actively seeking it out despite the negative consequences. It produces the response. You know what's coming, and so you're so eager for it, you keep doing it. And so it's like a slot machine. We are literally guinea pigs who are like stuck in a cage. We're going up and we're hitting that button, trying to get our fix. And they have designed and created these applications to do just that. The different sounds, the different features, the likes, the waves, the emojis, the notifications. All of it is designed to produce and grab your attention, to engage you, and to keep you using it longer and longer.
And what is the, it's either an addiction principle or there's some principle where basically, and I'm forgetting it now, but if something is continuous, it's different than when something is unexpected. Like when the reward is unexpected, it's actually more satisfying. Which is like, so every time if you push the lever, right? Like if you're a rat in a study, you push it, you get something. Okay, you get like usually it's like sugar. Okay, yeah, I got it. Every time you push it, you know. But sometimes when they push it, they don't get it. And other times they do. It becomes even more addictive. I don't know the word. I can't remember what the word or the name of this is, but that's the way that they've actually manufactured now, like the way that the algorithms work. So it's not, so every time like when you post a picture, you're like, all right, well I have this many followers, you know, this type of picture, like this picture got whatever, 1,000 likes, and then this next one got 400, and then the next one gets more, and then it gets less, and then it's like, oh my gosh, oh, I gotta start putting more pictures out because the last one got more, and then when am I gonna, and then so when it's this like uneven reward schedule, I guess, like again, I can't remember the name of it, that becomes even more addictive, and that's exactly what they've started doing. So it's not just A plus B, like, you know, it's like...
Well, and they've engineered how you even receive those rewards.
Yeah.
Most people think that like, so you post a picture, you have whatever thousands of followers that follow you. So if Ricky and you opens up his phone and I check, you know, your Instagram account and I like one of your pictures and I like it, you don't necessarily see that like in real time. What some of these algorithms are actually designed to do is they'll compile a number of likes. So when it reaches 10 likes, it'll go from, all right, Lauren initially had, you know, 50 likes on a picture. Well, now all of a sudden it goes from 50 to 75 likes instantly. Because it flooded you by not just receiving one like, but it kind of held them back, and it floods you with 25 new likes. It kind of holds them back in a sense to increase the reward. And so it's not even what you're thinking. You're not even seeing things in real time. These apps are designed to create these responses by holding things back so that they know they can engage you even further. Because if you got one like, you're like, whatever. But all of a sudden you look at your phone and you're like, oh, you have 32 responses. It's a bigger smile on your face. You're happier, right? There's a greater sense of self-esteem and self-worth associated with the fact that now 30 more people like my picture instead of just one.
And this is why it's so damaging, particularly when we have now kids using this, or people who have, let's say, lower self-esteem using these types of apps, because when things are not consistent, or some things are rewarded more than others, or some people are rewarded more than others, it becomes this, you know, this isn't fair, or like I'm missing out, or like why am I not as good? And then, you know, we always have a negativity bias, always, with everything. So like, not just negative people, everybody does. So meaning like you could have 100 positive comments and you get one negative comment and all you do is fixate on that. And there's
You're
always...
rejecting the positive, go back to our thinking errors debate.
It doesn't matter how great your post or your picture or your message or your video, whatever the fuck it is, doesn't matter how great it is, there is going to be somebody who either doesn't like it, doesn't like you, disagrees, and that is totally okay, because not everybody should agree with everything that you're saying, just like you don't agree with everything that they're saying. But when it's filtered through this lens of like, well, everybody else liked it, and this one person did, well, why is it? Should I change myself? Should I change this? Should I do that? Whatever. And then it becomes this whole really weird thing that you start wrapping your identity around. Oh, should I share things only based on what people like?
Yep.
And like, what version of myself should I present here? And then the line doesn't, like, it's really blurry between like in-person you versus like social media you. And then you're like, well, then who am I? Like you said, like an identity crisis, like who am I actually as a person? Right? And it's like, this is so wild that all of this has stemmed from like screen time stuff, and we're not even getting into, because again, I have far less experience with video games, meaning like zero, but there's a whole host of people who have really, really severe issues with video games. So it's not just social media, it's any kind of screen time. I mean, even something as simple as, like YouTube or Netflix, like the way that it doesn't even, like it doesn't stop. It just starts the next thing. For YouTube, it's suggested videos that it just starts to play. And then every time you click on that, this was actually from the movie, every time you click on that, it's like reinforcing that algorithm and directing you more and more. So the one guy was like, the best way that you can do that is like literally, so every time I'm like, cancel. I'm like, I don't want to hear this. Even if I want to hear that video, I'll like go search it, like literally. And the same thing with something like a Netflix, like episode 1 played. Well, then it used to stop, and you'd have to like see the screen and like click on episode 2. So there was like a stopping mechanism. Now it's like, well, I started playing. Like, am I really going to turn it off? Like, just one more episode, and then you've watched 5 episodes, and now it's 3 a.m, and you're like, holy shit, like I got to get up for work, and then your sleep's disrupted, and then you're a total asshole the next day. Like,
and it's only okay to stay up till 3 a.m. if you're watching Cobra Kai. That's the only reason you should be binging a show.
Confession? So I'm like, oh god.
Confession? Who doesn't love Cobra Kai?
Okay.
Stop.
Stop. Yeah. Okay, right. Cobra Kai.
But yes.
That's pretty awesome. Season 3 was so good. Oh my god. I love, oh my god, the fucking main guy's name.
Johnny Lawrence?
Yeah. Him, like the episode, if anybody's seen it, the episode where he's taking the pictures for Facebook. Oh my god.
I love the fact that he posted that, like he wrote that whole detailed thing about what he's been doing, and then he deleted it all and he's like, nothing, what about you? Alright, but
classic.
to piggyback off of what you were talking about, our bodies naturally produce safeguards for certain things. Like for example, eating, right? Eventually your stomach gets full. If you're not really restricting your diet and like just trying to maintain things, eventually your stomach gets full and you stop eating. If it didn't have that response, you would die. Social media apps have no safeguards. They're not designed to, there's no way to stop. So here's an interesting fact that most people don't know, and this is something that I had researched a while ago. The company, that Dopamine Lab company, their entire purpose was to create apps that were addicting. They actually created an app, it's called Space, okay? And Space was designed initially to produce, you download it on your phone, you register all your different apps to it, and what it does is it produced a 12-second gap between when you clicked your social media account to when it would open, okay? And in that 12 seconds of space, people had enough time to be like, oh, fuck it, this isn't worth it, and they would put their phone down and walk away. So this is the company who created the problem, created this 12-second delay app. Initially, the App Store did not want to carry it because it went against everything that they were trying to sell you, which is the fact that they want user engagement. So initially it was rejected. When we were talking about this podcast, I went and I grabbed my phone and I typed in Space and I scrolled through and I actually counted, because I'm a little bit of a freak, it was the 66th app down the line. There were 65 other apps above it, and it was like Galaxy this and Space Invaders and NASA apps and Space Time Continuum and all this other
black holes,
video games and all this other stuff. But I'm like, so I know there's one app that I know of, right? That I'm like, all right, this is specifically designed to get, and I had to keep scrolling, and I was like, this is ridiculous. So I went back up and I started to count, and I'm like, it took 66. I had to go through 66 different apps just to find the one that would only delay opening the social media app by 12 seconds. Look it up. It's still there. But you have to specifically find it, and it's wedged between Galaxy Play and like Space Invaders. So
sad.
It is, and to talk about what you were talking about before, when it comes to self-harm and changing your perception of yourself, and this is something that I want parents to understand, is prior to social media, prior to cell phones becoming habitual use or consistent use, right? If we look at it from 2010 back, numbers were fairly consistent. And I think the Social Dilemma does a really great job of identifying some of these things. And I took some of the statistics from their show. There's two different types really of like self-harm. There's people who are cutting, and then there's people who are genuinely suicidal. And they looked at it within two categories, and this is for teens. They had a preteen category, which is like 10 to 14, and then they had a late teen category, which is 15 to 19. And this is hospitalization versus self-harm. So these are people who needed to be hospitalized, like Baker acted, because they were suicidal, they were depressed, whatever. And in preteens, they saw an increase in hospitalization from 2010, and the statistics from 2011 to 2013, they saw 189% increase in hospitalizations. And in that same category for preteen girls, for self-harm, they saw 151% increase, which traditionally that category, preteen girls, that 10 to 14, don't engage in self-harming behaviors. And they have seen a 151% increase in 2 years. That was 2013. We're 2021 right now. Those numbers have only continued to escalate with how much more common these phones are. Same things with the late teen people. The late teens, the 15 to 19 in hospitalizations, they saw a 62% increase. And in self-harm, they saw a 70% increase. And that's within a period of 2 years, as opposed to what maybe was 10 or 15 years of hard research that said, all right, this is pretty consistent. They may vary a little bit, but these are the numbers and they've stayed consistent. So understand, when I say you're giving your kids something that's really dangerous, you're giving them access to self-harm. You're increasing, depending on their age, these things exponentially to occur. And as a parent, you should be terrified of that, because if you're not, I don't know what to tell you, then you're not really looking out for the best interest of your child.
And these are like, people get really uncomfortable when you talk about certain statistics, but the likelihood that your kid, particularly a female, will experience this versus getting abducted is so much higher.
Correct.
And nobody wants to talk about that, because they go, oh my gosh, well, kids still get abducted. Mm-hmm. And of course that is horrifying. But there are safeguards, like we talked about. There's other things that you can do in order to protect them and still communicate with them.
Right.
That does not involve them being on social media apps and having iPads and iPhones.
Right.
So this is not about, one is worse than the other, but it's like, you can't ignore these statistics. And these really, really, really affect girls much more. Because
Absolutely.
The way that girls and boys communicate, like, boys are much more physical, mm-hmm. I don't know, maybe that's changed too, but that used to be how things were handled. Whereas girls are a little bit more catty. Everybody knows that. Like, girls attack each other, mm-hmm. right? It's not like, and they attack each other for things like what you look like and like who you're, like they will like embarrass you, and they will
right.
like gang up on you and like all of that kind of stuff. And they will bully, not in a physical way, but in a verbal way.
Right.
So what has happened is people can literally, not just, people can create these fake accounts who are like literally just bullies, and they do, like, girls will bully each other much more, mm-hmm. which is why we're seeing this, you know what I mean? And obviously all of the like self-worth stuff, and if you're a 12-year-old or a 14-year-old girl and you're following, the Kardashians, and you're like, oh my god, like, why do they have millions of dollars and millions of likes, and how do they look? Like, of course, like, they don't even understand what that means, but you see that, and you see all these images of all these celebrities, and it's just like constantly being bombarded with this stuff, and it's like, this needs to like really, really be taken seriously. Mm-hmm. Like, the fact that nobody like likes talking about this is so crazy to me.
Right.
Like, how do you guys not take this? Like, this is not just a matter of like, oh, my kid's gonna get bullied at school because they don't have a phone. Well, the percentage that they're probably gonna get Baker acted is higher if they have this. So like, where's the real harm here?
Right.
Like, you thinking that they're gonna be bullied by their peer group? Like, probably not.
Yeah. I'll take the bullying in that particular scenario, because that bullying has to occur face to face and in real time.
Yeah.
Versus the fact that the kid can look on their cell phone or a Facebook page or an Instagram post and see every person from their school posting things. So now I'm only dealing with one or two people that are talking crap to me, versus like my entire senior class jumping on me because I don't have this. And if you don't have it, you don't have to see all that crap. And they're not going to talk about you because you're not there. So to piggyback off of what you were saying, generally what we're seeing is, and look up anything and it'll tell you this, you're seeing increases in depression, anxiety across the board, and it's almost directly related to cell phone use. It's like the only variable that people can really identify. And so what we are seeing is there are people who are much more fragile. They have a much less social interaction or romantic interactions, even within teenagers, because they're losing the ability to actually communicate like face to face and interact without the safety and the buffer of the screen. So we're actually seeing dating numbers and romantic relationships starting to decrease. And they've lost the ability to be independent. Their independent skills are starting to drop. But traditionally speaking, girls, when they start to experience more anxiety and depression, that gets turned inward. That gets turned inward into self-hate and self-loathing. So it increases and the cycle stays within them. They basically take those things and they turn it inward on themselves. Whereas boys, in the opposite way, when we feel anxious and depressed, we now take it and we project it outward. And so our objective is to hurt other people, right? So there's the difference. Most of teenage girls will feel anxiety and depression. It gets turned inward where they hate themselves. And boys turn it outward when now I hate everybody else. But they're still experiencing the same things. It's just manifesting differently. And so children now, they don't have the same coping skills that they used to have. They don't have the independent skills. You're seeing kids later and later and later in life leaving the home, having to rely more heavily on their parents than ever before because they don't possess the ability to go out and do these things. They don't know how to navigate situations at work because they've never really worked or been in environments where they're independent of their phones and their parents and people are making choices for them. They don't know how to negotiate relationships or actually problem solve. So there's a lot of negative effects because people are just living in a world that doesn't actually exist.
And like we said, it's a lot easier. You can say whatever you want behind a phone and you can feel very strong about some opinion and you can share it and you can, there's really no consequences, right? Like what is the consequence of bullying somebody on the phone? Like there's very little, especially if it's like a fake account, right? Which like don't pretend like people don't, like there's plenty of people who have fake accounts or like put themselves under a different name and whatever. And you can literally say whatever without any repercussions. And this is happening. And this is again, particularly affecting young girls. And this should scare the fuck out of everybody. And we're seeing all of these issues, like you said, like it's not just, when you're this 10 to 14-year-old group, like, there was more self-harm and there was more this, and then it just went away. No, these things continue and they get worse and they happen in different ways. They have less independence, they have less coping skills. And then the same person who was 10 to 14 and experiencing this, once they're 25, do you think that's just going to go away? Those feelings are just going to disappear? No, they've compounded and they've gotten much worse over time.
The 10 to 14 eventually move into the 15 to 19.
Yeah.
And then those become adults. So you struggle with it. And so I think in our next podcast, we're going to talk about, boundaries and setting up limits, not only with social media, but other aspects of life. Because
it's incredibly important. And like I said in the beginning, Jonathan Haidt has done a lot of really, really great work in this book. And I can't recommend in this field, and I can't recommend the book Coddling of the American Mind enough. It's probably the most balanced book I've read on the topic. He does not really interject a ton of, a lot of times when you hear these topics, people get very like one-sided, and he is very balanced. He presents everything. He uses all data. This is not opinions. And him and the co-author, they are both professors at different universities. So they're seeing not only the changes like with their own kids, but they're seeing the differences in kids who are coming to these colleges, and they're using actual science to back this up. Like these are not made up. This is not some professor who just spilled their own biases and their own like negative thoughts into a book. Like this is all backed up stuff. So cannot recommend that enough. It goes into a lot, and a lot of his work just in general is really, really great. So it's something that I think we all need to really understand and take more seriously, because I think people are taking it more seriously, which is good. Think obviously like, years ago, a movie like The Social Dilemma might not have come out, right? And like now it is, and these people are talking about it more, but we really...
Years ago they were creating.
They were creating it, and now they were like, oh shit, we need to do something about this.
We created a monster and we can't control it. And it's destroying and it's eroding the fabric of development and society.
literally, without being super dramatic, I do believe that it is eroding the fabric of society and the way that people interact with one another. And I think that the past few years we've seen it's just played out. I mean, if you're not paying attention to what's been happening the past few years with the way that people communicate, particularly online, this is directly because of all of this. Mm-hmm. Like it is 100% because of this. Nothing else has changed. Things have only gotten substantially better in the world. Mm-hmm. Like substantially better all across the world, across all fucking facets. Most things have gotten better.
Yep.
And things are seemingly so much worse. And why is it? So enough doom and gloom. We wanted to make this because, again, obviously we're pretty passionate about this topic. I think it's really, really important. And some people, when I shared about, watching The Social Dilemma finally, there was a lot of people who were like, this completely changed like what we did in our household.
Yes.
We took the iPads away, we set, limits on YouTube, we have, device rules in our family now where they didn't before, and the whole point, and I think what's so great about, that movie and Jonathan Haidt and all these people who are doing work in here, they're not saying like never go on a device again because to use their words, like the genie's out of the bottle, like we can't put it back. Mm-hmm. We're not going to go back to a society where there's no internet. Like it's just not going to happen. And it doesn't need to be, but there needs to be regulations. And until there's some kind of regulations put in place, which who knows if those will even ever happen or be worth a fuck, we all need to take, responsibility in our own end, whether it's for ourselves personally or for our families, in order to protect them from these types of things and not let your child be another statistic.
Yeah. No one's going to save you right now.
No.
You need to be responsible for saving yourself and protecting your children. And that's the truth. And there's no two ways around it. There's nothing I can say as a therapist to make you think otherwise. The responsibility is yours and yours alone to protect your family. That's it.
And that's it. So, like we said, next podcast will be about boundaries, not just for this, but we will touch on that. So thank you guys, as always, for listening. And for more information about coaching or other podcasts, articles, etc., you can go to teamlocofit.com. If you're interested in therapy or mental health consulting with Rick, you can go to the show notes and there's the email there. And we will catch you guys next time.